Diamond in a gold mine. Shifting memories of a cool summer and a purple-colored sky that never showed emotion. A lifeless time where the world was mine. The streets filled with no one or nothing but the beautiful touch of wind and pint-sized rays of light wasting from the street poles. The very distant voice of my mother cured my trance as the night felt unreal. Staring into the open fields as if the roads went on forever, as the wind seemed to lift the shackles of what once held me down. Looking up into the sky as the clouds swayed so gentle, it was hypnotizing. Laid back, staring into the sky as if I was peeking into heaven, feeling the presence in the pit of my stomach. I've captured it. The beauty of life, which seemed so prone to me before. The world was mine, and for that second I realized that no one could take this away. For that period of my life, I wondered where I would find happiness, not knowing to look inside myself. This feeling was tradition. The sweet smell of home-cooked biscuits broke the spell as I jumped back into reality and charged through the straw door. My mother cooked every night for me and my brother. She was a single parent, but exceeded the strength of two. The stature of a goddess and the muscle tone of a small man, she worked a night shift. Me and my brother watched her leave every night. We would stare down the road, holding on to a biscuit and leaning on our low-jagged fence, seeing her figure blend into the Mississippi mist. Every night it felt like losing her, knowing every morning I would wake with the smell of fresh biscuits and the aroma of maple syrup torturing my appetite. Still pondered by how the scent could disrupt even the deepest sleep, I am awake. My brother being coherent to my awakening, he rose, reaching for the sky, grunting deeply as he pushed aside the heavy quilts. I stood tall, walking towards the kitchen, hearing the vivid sound of popping bacon, suddenly being stopped by the deep and most haunting sound of a man talking. It startled me, as a shock of confusion rested on my chest. Vague but distant, I felt angered, as if the chronicles of my life was being paused by some unknown presence. Shaken by the uncanny vibe this day took, I walked into the kitchen, seeing my mother hugged against this intruder, surprised to see my mother beyond her usual look, a busty glow, as she flowed in a red rosary Sunday dress. Her back to me, I stood as if I wasn't welcome. My brother ran into the kitchen, unaware of the situation. He too paused. Broke from her affection, the man walked towards me and my brother, shaking his hand through his tangled hair. He spoke strong as if he knew us, attempting to lift my brother in a sign of love. Standing tall with the posture of an old oak tree, I did not give in. My mind cluttered with emotion, my mother's voice provided some clarity. She whispered so gently, "That's your father." For some reason, I didn't feel happiness, as if I knew trouble was on a campaign towards our lives. I sat silent, as scorn compiled around my heart. Finally, I started to feel emotion. Tears fell from my eyes without any indication. I knew this was pain. My mother embraced me as the hug seemed to squeeze the emotion out of my soul. I felt betrayed by the acceptance that my brother had for the man. I walked to my room, assured by my mother's testimony that everything's all right. My mother usually washing clothes in the afternoons. I was startled by the shanty sounds of laughter. He was a traveling poet that had a glamorous life. His prosperity seemed to hurt me more than his absence. He spoke as if he was a god. His voice was loud and seemed to shake the very foundation of our home. He proceeded to read a poem to my mother. These days usually occupied by my brother, it felt as if he had stole my very being. Staring into my cracked bedroom window, the sun flushed away in the vivid blue sky. Piercing lights bathed the roses, and the birds flew so freely. The beauty of today couldn't camouflage the storm I knew that was on its way. Hearing his voice pushing through the thin walls, he began to read. He said, "This one is called Jilted Towards Tomorrow. Tomorrow feels as if it is today. The subtle movements of time winks at my ugly mind. My thoughts blush as tomorrow attractions drive away the malice of today, and anticipation as if I was guaranteed happiness. My mind tries to help, but it knows the truth. I am on the edge, waiting to fall, never colliding with the ground, knowing that it meant death. The reality is, tomorrow is today, and the sun is shining no more. The words bled through my blockade. It had touched me deep, as the hate had burned to ashes. His words lured me towards him. I dropped my guard. I walked out of the room as all the attention shifted towards me. I asked bluntly, "So why you leave us?" He rose from his seat, staring towards the open door. I was afraid of being held down. My mother stopped the confession and dumped it on my boisterous attitude. He paused and said, "No, Mary, let me tell the boys. They my sons. Let me tell them." He kneeled to my brother, clenching his teeth and inhaling the summer breeze invited in by the door. He said, "Son, all my life I've chased dreams. All my life I looked for gold. I've always searched away from home, not knowing that my home was a gold mine. I was greedy and afraid. I ran. I ran from both of you, and I'm sorry." My thoughts paralyzed. My soul had met a pleasant bliss. He stood and spoke strong and confident. "I come bearing gifts." He reached into his traveler's bag and pulled out 2 wooden spinning tops engraved with our names. My mother, in a state of joy, hugged my father. The moment her arms wrapped around him, I felt the storm was over. The smell of warm rains drying away on the rose petals, the flooded echo sounds of lightning turned into Sunday morning choir. He said, "Wait, that's not it." He slowly pulled out shiny stones to look as if they captured the sun in each piece. "Diamonds," my mother screamed. My brother occupied by the spinning tops, I stared into the eyes of my mother, seeing a smile so beautiful, a glow that I never had seen before. She had reached happiness so potent I could not deny she was in love. Enticed by not only his gifts, but his honesty, we listened to his stories until nightfall. The sun was asleep as the clouds provided a small amount of light. Tonight wasn't the same as the other nights. Tonight was beyond silent, so quiet that your thoughts screamed at the ambience of nothingness that crowded the air. Hearing vague sounds in the kitchen, I felt relieved that I wasn't the only one awake. I walked into the kitchen very slowly, seeing my father pour money onto the table. The money was hypnotizing and allured me into his jubilee destruction. My father said with tears falling down his face, "Son, I can't stay. I have to go. I love you, and for that reason I'm leaving. Tell your mother and your brother I always loved them." The words didn't catch up to me until the door closed behind him. This was the worst moment of my life. I ran behind him. My mind pondered, why would he do this? I stormed out of the house, not letting him leave. I grabbed against his clothes as he walked strong, forcing my grip to break. I screamed, "Father!" as he blended away into the Mississippi mist. That mist guarded my happiness. I stood behind the mist my whole life, watching it consume everything. I gathered the courage and chased after my father. Inside the mist, I felt a rush of strength. Running beyond the mist felt like an eternal loop around my life. Soon tearing through the thick fog, I felt relieved, squinting my eyes, seeing my father distant but visible. The cold bit to my skin as it threw my focus. My father ahead, My heart was passionate and awake. I walked slowly down the wide, bold road. My vision became vivid and abate to my surroundings. I seen my father clear. A long white rounded car pulled beside my father. He got into the car slowly, driving away into the distant darkness. I turned back and ran, freeing myself from emotion, attempting to trap the tears prying through my soul. I leaped over the low jacket fence and pushed through the straw door. My mother already awake. I seen fear and anger in her eyes. Before she could criticize my obscure behavior, I told her what happened. The night was new, as the money was untouched. My mother still in the dress and beautiful diamonds. She went outside. A coat wrapped around her shoulders, she sat on the front steps, looking into her eyes as if she was blind, staring into nothingness, only hearing my thoughts on how to introduce communication with her. I knew she was hurt, and it flared her hate for my father I've never had. I said, "Mother, is he gone forever?" "Who knows?" she responded. "He's just being himself, baby. Even though he left like this, I want you to love him and know that he loves you." The wind blew around the chilled air as the night became darker. We stood together as if we was lifting the sky. My mother said, "I love you." I noticed a strong light shining through the cracks of the mist. Seeing the white rounded car break free from the fog, I said, "Mama, that's Daddy, Mama, that's him." The car pulled in front of the house, honked twice. My mother threw back her coat and lifted her long dress. She walked to the car with her hands on her hip. My father stepped out the car crying, making my mother pause. A large-figured, dark-souled man stepped out behind him. He said, "Terry, my money better be here." They slowly walked around the car with a gun pinned to my father's head. My mother screamed, "No, no, let him go." She fell to the ground as her dress caught wind on the way down. She broke into tears as another man stepped out of the driver's side. The night was deep as it felt unreal. The storm was here. All that I had feared was here. My father screamed to my mother, "Get out of here. Get the boys and go." I ran inside as my brother was in his room playing with the spinning tops. I could hear my mother screaming as he came closer to the house. I grabbed my brother and pulled down the attic stairs in our hallway. I told him to be quiet and wait until I come back. I peeked around the corner looking for my mother. I tugged on her dress as she screamed, "Run, baby." The guy screamed to my father, "Where's my money, Terry? I'm not playing." His partner passed him the gun. The man said, "Okay, this nigga wanna play games." He had struck my father in the face with the gun. The force of the gun sliced open the top part of his eye. The blood flew against the walls as my father stood strong. The man struck him again in the same place. My father fell. He said, "Now get up and tell me where it's at." My father stumbled up trying to stand. My brother started to come down from the attic. I rushed him back up there and demanded him to stay put. My mother screamed, "There's money in the kitchen, just take it." The man pushed my mother out of the way and walked into the kitchen. My father said, "Just take the money and leave them be." I watched out of the dark corners of the hallway, the men frantically pushing the money in the bag. After clearing the table, they walked towards my mother. One of the men pulled up her dress and violently grabbed her breast. He said, "Hey Don, we got a pretty one here." He grabbed her as she was overpowered and pushed against the wall. My father raged. He broke free and rushed the man. He picked him up and ran him into a wall. The man screamed, "Hey, shoot him, Don, shoot him." My mom screamed, "No, please, God." Bang. The world was moving in slow motion. I was in the eye of the storm. I seen the bullet leave the gun and enter my father's skull, sculpting away at his flesh. It janked his head back, splattering blood on the walls. That moment, all I could see was me running through the mist. All I could hear was the wind, the crickets, the storm. My father's eyes was blank and wide open. He stumbled around and fell like a giant, his head facing the ceiling. He was no more. The two men ran out the house. My mother was silent and didn't move. My little brother peeked from the top of the attic. The storm was passing. We sat there invisible, the night in silence. The neighbors, the ambulance, the storm, silent. The storm slept as the sun stood wide awake. The sunlight was strong and blinding. My mom was sitting on the porch, still silent from the night before. We sat together. As the time grew, she slowly asked, "How you feeling?" "I don't know," I replied. My mother was strong but emotionally ripe. "I found this in his bag," my mother said. She gave me a crumpled piece of paper. It reads, "Eyes from Heaven." I stared into the purple-colored sky, oblivious of my surroundings, accommodated by the winds. I'm peeking into heaven. Will I be invited in, staying pure to my soul, looking down on all who look up? My mother went inside the house and started to cook biscuits. The aroma brought back a sense of stability. The day blew past as nightfall awakened. She prepared for work as every night. It was tradition. My mother walked out of the house as me and my brother looked over the low jagged fence. She walked down the cool road. She began to fade as the Mississippi mist took her away. That night, I stared into the sky. All these years, I looked up, trying to peek into heaven. Today, I couldn't. I couldn't see anything. The clouds didn't sway, and my soul felt nothing. But I knew today, someone was looking back. My brother ran out the house and ran into me. He was excited, and his eyes filled with joy. He gave me a box. On the top it reads, "Tomorrow." I opened the box, and it was filled with diamonds. I began to cry. Looking up into the purple-colored sky, the clouds now swaying gently, I felt it in my soul. Staring into heaven, knowing Father was staring back.